Self-efficacy is determined by three things. The first thing that we've come to understand that shapes our self-efficacy is our environment. You and I don't have the power to choose, to select, to determine what environment we're born into. And so some people are born into an environment where they see presidents and they see accountants and they see doctors and they see lawyers and they see Congress people and they see successful people that have gone on through school. And others like me are born into an environment where I didn't know anybody in my immediate family that had graduated from an institution of higher education. Some people are grown into an environment where they are affirmed and they are applauded and they are acclaimed. Other people are born into an environment where that's not the case. And so part of my determination as to what we can do is based on the environment that we grew up in. And that's not necessarily economic, because I could tell you of two little sisters growing up in Compton playing tennis on a blacktop court whose environment taught them, I can do Wimbledon. I can be the best in a sport. I can tell you of a whole family on the other side of the economic spectrum who had everything as far as finance was concerned, and yet because of their environment, they truly believed that anybody sitting around their dinner table could be president of the United States. As a matter of fact, their father, Joseph, declared that his oldest son would in fact be president, but he died. And so then he said, all right, John, you're next. John was assassinated. All right, Robert, you're next. Robert was assassinated. All right, Teddy, you're next. And so everybody around that table, because of the environment that they grew up in, really believed that I can be president of the United States. Your environment helps to shape what you think of yourself. I am on the board of a school, the Academy for Urban Scholars. And this school is a school for students that drop out of high school. When you walk into this school, you walk through metal detectors. There are at least 3 gangs that are represented in the school, and every once in a while the principal has to have a talk with students to understand that you will not have violence on school grounds. There have been students shot outside of school grounds, but not on school grounds. That's the type of school this is, and some of those students grew up in an environment where they were not taught the possibility of potential. They were taught survival. And so their challenge is different from yours. Their challenge is different from mine. Environment teaches us what we're capable of becoming. But the second thing that I'd like to talk about relative to self-efficacy, and I'm going someplace, just bear with me for a second, is exposure. One of the things, this is just between us, one of the things that I sometimes allow my students to do is to bring their children to class. Because if you've never seen a college, right? If you've never seen a classroom, sometimes it seems magical, mysterious, mystical, bigger than me. Maybe I can't do that. But when you see something, that's why I think traveling is such a wonderfully educational experience. When you travel and see different cultures and different peoples and different ideas and different religions and different political structures and different ideologies, you get a bigger sense of the world, and maybe you even see a galaxy of potential. What we are exposed to teaches us what is possible. At last, before I go into the last story, is experience. If I flunked algebra in the 9th grade, maybe by the time I get to college, I think that I can't do algebra. If I flunked science in the 10th grade, maybe by the time I get to college, I think that I can't do that. But how many of you know none of us have done our best yet? And sometimes there is an experience that gives us an epiphany, an aha moment, where what once was impossible is now possible. I have a son. I won't tell you his age because this is being videotaped and he'll get mad at me, but he's 37. And when he was going to high school, I would tell him, you got to study. Yeah, You got to do better. What are you doing? Why aren't you trying harder? But how many of you know a baby learns how to walk when they learn how to walk? We're on different paths. We have different time schedules. And because my time schedule might be different from yours, that doesn't mean that I can't do it, that I won't unlock my potential, that I won't realize the promise that's in me. He got an associate's degree last year. He'll get his bachelor's degree this coming summer. I'm proud of him. His early experience taught him that he couldn't do school. He had an individual educational plan, and he struggled with school. It's not that he didn't try. He struggled with school, but he'll have a bachelor's degree this year. Now, this is my point. As you think about environment, as you think about experience and exposure, put those on top of the story that I'm about to tell you. Another 4-year-old boy grows up in a neighborhood that's not like the neighborhoods we have today. I mean, this was a real neighborhood. And all right, let me ask you this. How many of you, show of hands, how many of you know the names of your neighbor to the left and right of you? How many of you don't? I happen to have. I grew up in a neighborhood where I knew, I'm serious, for a 2-block radius in almost any direction, I knew everybody's name. To the left of me was Mr. and Mrs. Miller. To the right of me was Mr. and Mrs. Artis. Across the street was Mr. and Mrs. Hearn. Across the street, right down from them, was Mrs. Thomas. She was the only single parent that I knew in our neighborhood. Her son's name was John. Right next to them was Terry Lambert and her mother and father. Down the street was Mrs. Lewis. I almost said her first name, and I don't do that. Her name, I still can't do that. My mother and father have been dead for at least 10 years, and I still can't say their first name. Because I grew up in a neighborhood where we just didn't do that. As a matter of fact, I hope my neighbors don't see this, but I was out working on my yard a couple of years ago, and the little girl that lives next to me, she's such a cute little girl. She said, "Hey, Ruel." I didn't know how to respond to that. Because in the neighborhood that I grew up, you just didn't call adults by their first name. You just didn't do that. Anyway, I knew everybody's name, and in the alley next to the block that I grew up in, there was a man named Mr. Charlie, and Mr. Charlie was the wise man of the neighborhood. And you could go and talk to Mr. Charlie, and he would dispense wisdom. He would just tell you everything that you ever needed to know about the world. And so at 4 years old, I always loved to talk to older people. I don't know what's wrong with me. I always liked to talk to older people. And so I would go and sit on his back porch, and he would dispense wisdom. And one day Mr. Charlie told me, he said, "Young man, the gentleman that lived next to me, the little boy that lived next to me, his name was David. He said, you're going to catch David in school." David was 2 years older than me. I hadn't started kindergarten yet. David was already in the 1st grade. And he said to me, "You're going to catch David in school." I don't know how he knew. I really don't. But David and I graduated in the same year. You see, I did have an environment that should have made me feel good about myself. I did have exposure to good people that gave me positive self-image conversation. I did have experiences that should have made me feel I can do anything, and yet in the 12th grade, when I went to speak to the high school counselor, it didn't come together for me. When I was in high school, the only real thing that was important to me was music. I loved music. I love the Spinners. You don't know nothing about the Spinners. I loved the Temptations. I loved the Motown sound. I loved music. And so my grades weren't really reflective of my ability. They were reflective of my love being elsewhere. And so in the 12th grade, I don't know if you had to do this, but in the 12th grade, one of the things that you had to do was before you graduated, you had to have sort of an exit conversation with the high school counselor. And so I was called to the counselor's office. I didn't like going to the administrative offices because it was right next to the principal's office, and that wasn't always a good thing for me. And so I walked up the marble steps of West High School into the administrative offices, and I sat down, and next to me on my left was Steve. Steve was always in the principal's office. He was always getting suspended. And to the right of me was another little child that was about to go home because she was sick. And so I started talking to Steve, and we started cracking jokes, and we were having a good time, and then they called my name. And I walked back to the counselor's office, and he told me to sit down. And he said, "Young man, do you know why you're here?" No, sir. See, I was always taught to say, "No, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am." I had the game down. It didn't matter what I was thinking. That's what I was going to do. "No, sir." He said, "Well, young man, we're trying to determine what our students are going to become after high school." And then it was on. Because I knew that whenever an adult asked you what you wanted, you were always supposed to say, "I want to go to college." Well, the fact of the matter is that my environment, as affirming as it had been, could not teach me what a credit hour was. See, Mr. Miller had dignity, but he was a postman. Mr. Artis had dignity, but he worked for DCSC. Mr. Hearns had dignity, but he laid carpet. I didn't have anybody in my immediate family. I didn't have anybody in my neighborhood that I knew went to college. And so he asked me, "Young man, what do you want to do when you graduate?" And I said, "I want to go to college." And he had this manila folder, and I saw my name written on it, and he opened it, and it seemed like he was opening it in slow motion. And he read some, and then he looked up at me. And he said, "Young man, I don't think that's what you want to do. I think you want to get a job. I think you want to learn a trade." And my environment and my experience and my exposure went out the window. And 3 months after graduation from high school, I was working at Westinghouse Corporation in the factory. Now, at Westinghouse Corporation, one of the things that we made were refrigerators. And so I was placed on line 1. That's where we made refrigerators. And refrigerators would come down the assembly line, different people at different stations would do different things with the refrigerator. One would put in the shelving, somebody else would put in the lights, somebody else would put in the fiberglass, somebody else would drill in the door. And by the time it got down to my station, which was about 400 yards down from where this refrigerator started, when it got down to my station, my job for 8 hours a day was to bend, turn, and lift a refrigerator. A refrigerator for 8 hours a day. At the end of the first day, I walked to the cafeteria, and I put my head down on the cafeteria table, and I fell asleep. I woke up 2 hours later, and I had a new dream. My dream was to go to college. I went and I enrolled in Ohio State University, and I found something. This stuff isn't that hard. You read some books, you listen to a few people talk at you, you take a test, you get a good grade. That's it. I can do that. I transferred from Ohio State University because before I graduated from Ohio State University, I got married at the age of 21. Don't do it. At the age of 21, I had 3 children. I transferred to Franklin University, got a bachelor's degree in business administration. I went on and got a master's degree from Central Michigan University. I went to Ohio University, enrolled in a PhD program. I finished all the coursework, finished the comps, had a 3.62, and I wish I could find that counselor, because I'd have something to say to him. You see, sometimes people judge you not based on what your potential is, but based on what you've done. They can't see your integrity. They can't see your honesty. They can't see your drive. They really can't see your potential. All they can see was what's on a piece of paper, and they try to judge your potential. No, no, no. This is the point. You can never let anybody else define you, because they will always, always, always define you too small. I won't let anybody, whether they love me or hate me, whether they're neutral or positive, I don't care who you are, you will never define me, because I have the keys to my potential. Your life is a story. You can't let anybody else hold the pen, because they'll write a story that doesn't let you live up to your full potential.